Very good afternoon to all of you. And, it's always a challenge to be the last speaker because a lot has been said, and then there is this urge for everyone to pop out for a cup of tea. So I think I'll keep it really short, but I will start with a couple of things which I was gathering while I was listening to all my colleagues here. And I was listening to it as a teacher, I was listening to it as a researcher, and also as someone who engages in practice. And I could draw quite a bit from all the three perspectives. Some of the key things that were said by my co-speakers were about, one was about the interconnectedness of issues, which everybody mentioned, that we work in silos, the issues are connected, it's a system that we work in, and things need to cut across sectors. So I'll talk a bit about it, that how we move across sectors. We attempt to move not across all sectors, but a bit. Second important thing was that about the scales, the spatial scale, since it's a planning school. Not all issues are rooted at a local level. Their roots are somewhere else at a regional scale or a neighborhood scale, and the problems manifest at a local scale. So while some studies require a more comprehensive spatial scale assessment, some studies and some solutions do require very localized solutions. So that's something to be kept in mind, especially for the students here, that it's not one size fits all. So somewhere you can use a sword and somewhere you can use a needle, as it's also said in some of our problems. So that was about the scale. Third was about the diversity. That the contexts are very diverse, be it in terms of socio-economic characteristics, or be it in terms of natural features, in terms of the economic capacity of the city, and therefore the solutions also have to be very context specific. And while we try to apply all of this, there is a general sentiment that we should learn, not reinvent the wheel, but learn from the practices around. Not copy-paste them, but learn and adapt to our own situation. So these were, I'm just echoing some of the things, and I will take off from there. And while we try and learn from these practices, an important point which Professor Rashid brought out was, what is the value we bring to what we are proposing? And how do we learn from our mistakes, accept them, and say that these are the solutions we want to work on? So some of these were broader learnings of today, and I think all of us should aspire to look at this interconnectedness, the applicability at scale, the diversity, and the context-specific solutions. Now, with this background, while I was reflecting, that where did we start the work that I'm going to present today? And since everything is interconnected, there is always an entry point that a person takes from his or her own standing in terms of background, in terms of professional training, in terms of academic training. So our entry point to this subject was through water sanitation hygiene, and that is where we entered, and it opened up the entire system to us, that it is all so interconnected. So we were doing study on a simple, so this is also part of our knowledge partnership with UNICEF, Gujarat, where we do a studio since last 3 years on water sanitation hygiene. And we do some pieces and we do some summer school. And this was sort of an output, or an offshoot rather, of that. So we started with a simple, the ask was to design a hand wash station for school children, post-COVID. And that's where we started our engagement with schools. We realized that hand wash station led us to understanding of how the toilets are, how the drinking water fountains are, how the general facility is. And from that, we went on to the school building to see how resilient is this school building in terms of the comfort it gives to the students. And this is how one thing led to another. And this study was also in parallel. Government of Gujarat was was undertaking this Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and under that Schools of Excellence program, under which they wanted to prepare a framework to say how schools could become more resilient. So this is a small part of a larger canvas where the studies included how the curriculum could include aspects of climate resilience, how capacity building needs to be done at all levels, be it teachers, parents and students. It also talked about physical infrastructure, and I'm today specifically going to talk about the school buildings and the infrastructure and how to make it climate resilient. But that doesn't mean that other aspects were not looked at or should not be looked at, but for paucity of time, I talk about this one particular aspect. Again here, we started with so we were looking at number of frameworks that exist which say what is climate resilience, what is climate change, what are the components of evaluation. So we started with a good review of all of that so that we are not redefining things. But what struck us was that there is something called absorptive capacity, which is a response that is given as an immediate response. And as an example, if I say it's just change in school timings to take care of heat wave, let's say, or inundation. There's something adaptive capacity where you adapt the building or the space for little better usage. For example, coloring the school walls with lighter color to receive less heat inside. Or something called transformative capacity. Example could be that you transform the school building. At a school building level, it could just be modification in the chhaja to reduce the heat coming into it, and many other things which we will look at. So we were looking at these three, and often these absorptive things are done by the school authorities and the children and the parents, and they know it very well. Adaptive are in between things, low-hanging fruits can be caught on easily. Transformative also do not require a great scientific research, but it requires attention to detail and attention to the actual problem on ground, where we have to come out of our academic understanding of big frameworks and narrow it down to a local level. So we followed this broadly, and we reviewed a number of school programs that were going on, what kind of indicators they were looking at. I'm not dwelling into this. We also looked at good practices in select cities and looked at what were the aspects the green schools or climate resilient schools were looking at. We looked at some global good practices. We were just trying to see what are the aspects they look at. And normally it is energy, waste, water, biodiversity, school buildings, and food. These were common things on a common denominator which was coming up. Next. Next. So climate resilient schools, all of it. I think the points have gone a little haywire. Go back, please. So we just decoded it into 4 elements at a building level, at a school compound level. Then these are the 4 elements we will look at along with Government of India Education Department. We look at the built environment of the school ground, the services in the school, and the stakeholder capacity, which is teachers, children, and their parents. Today I'll talk about the first 3 more. So next please. Just to give you a context, this is the lower part of Gujarat. If you see in the key map up there, Gir Somnath district, and within that it's a coastal district with 4 talukas, and we were talking about Kodinar taluka in Gujarat. That's where all our schools were located. So, yeah, we can move to next slide. So typical climatic situation in this area is that it experiences hot days, heat waves about 5 to 6 days minimum in a year, extreme precipitation, either there is very heavy rainfall or there is no rainfall. And also the cyclone and its residual effects are the prominent features of this place. Go to next please. We also looked at 2 studies which were done by Gujarat State. One was District Disaster Management Plan and another was Vulnerability Ranking. And on both the studies, Kodinar ranked high and it needed some kind of attention, and the schools there also needed some kind of attention. So we were just looking if there was any tempo much because it's a very, very rural, semi-rural context, and there isn't much change, thankfully, not much disruption in the natural drainages yet, and that was the good news. We started looking at schools in Kodinar. We did a couple of visits over a period of 6 months. The first visit was just to familiarize ourselves with the students and the teachers and their issues. And then we worked on some kind of solutions, took it back to them and saw whether some were workable or not. And we really co-created and validated some of those. We scrapped the ones which were very high-flying sounding, they were not very rooted. We kept the ones which sounded really simple, doable by those teachers, the principal of the school, or the students, and the government department. So there are about 163 schools in Kodinar, out of which 71% are government schools. And on an average, each school has about 200 to 250 students. These are very, very small schools. Generally, people from very modest economic background come to these schools. And next, please. So we visited there are about 15 schools which were shortlisted based on their location along the coast, along the water bodies and in the hinterlands. And we visited 12 of them just to see what's the context in which they are set. Next, please. So we were just looking at the spatial context, what is the surrounding, what's the kind of land use, what's the kind of access students have. So somebody talked about at home, between school and home, and in the school. So since the larger part of the study was about that, we looked at the context in which school was. And then we arrived at what was the kind of hazard and the exposure that was there, and how all the 12 schools were faring on that. So, next please. So the highest risk was extreme temperature, and the next was inundation during the time of heavy rains or during the time of cyclonic rains. These were the two biggest risks these schools were facing at a local level. Other risks, salinity index, etc., were more in the agricultural fields. Schools solved their problem through drinking water from other sources. So, next please. So we then selected 2 to 3 schools where we could go, interact and come up with solutions. Not getting into how exactly we did that, but there was a method to select and prioritize the schools. And then we started observing small spaces, small things within the built environment. For example, the southwest wall was totally unshaded and it received maximum amount of heat. And it had wide openings also. Then there were these big openings kept, but there was no chacha over those, because of which there was direct heat, and also during rains there would be a lot of water splashing. And just after the corridor was the classroom. Again, if we see the shading efficiency was very low because the ratio, the aspect ratio of the shades was very poor, and there was cross ventilation, as one of my colleagues said, provided from the ceiling, but it had to be made more indirect because these are high temperature areas, and if you have an opening at the top, it doesn't do as much good as it is designed to do. So it needs a cover on the top so that from the sides you get the light but not the heat. So these kind of things were discussed with the teachers, with the students, their understanding of these features. Again, the building color, the covered plaza where the covering had closed. This was their midday meal shed where they used to have midday meal. To provide a covering to that, they put tin roof on that. Even if there was a little gap left between the two, it could have allowed some kind of circulation. It used to get extremely difficult for the kids to sit here and eat. Then the roofs they could try easily the cool roof technique, which MHP and many others have tried, but that wasn't tried. Access to multiple buildings. Most of the times the toilets were outside the school building. And students would have to walk from their primary block, secondary block to the toilet. And either those paving may not be good, or if it is too hot, they would rather wait and hold on rather than going to the restrooms. The land grading was not great. Very little shaded area where, because their tin roof was not very efficient, they would go and sit under the tree. And so these kind of small things about the school ground. Or they were totally paved with paver blocks which were having cement joints. So no infiltration of water, but paved, not good enough to play as well. And some schools were way below the road level. You can't see really the picture here, but it was almost about 1.5 to 2 meters below the road level and would get flooded very easily. So, and the access provided to the toilets was of this kind, wherever it was, and often broken. So these were very, very small things that we started observing. Services, fans and lights were left on, tanks would overflow. After midday meal, they're supposed to wash their dishes, but the wash area would not be in a great shape. Composting pit was compulsory, but it was an open compost pit which would flood during rains and would rarely be used. Services very dysfunctional. So I think based on that, we did a ladder of these 4 aspects, and we tried to see whether the services were unavailable, they were basic, they were improved, or they were innovative. And most of the schools were at the level where they were basic and need to move to improved or innovative. Next please. This is again mapping of all these built environment parameters, the school ground parameters and service parameters. What we found was that all schools have improved level of built environment against all hazards except the extreme temperature. School grounds have problems of inundation, and all schools lie within unavailable and basic level of services for all hazards. So if we go ahead, I think then we zoomed into 3 schools. Let's move a little faster on this. And we came up with a tool called CHATRI. The acronym was given by my co-researcher, the graduate who liked to call it CHATRI because, and the acronym was, the full form was Climate Hazard Assessment Tool and Resilience Initiative. So this was the tool prepared for the education department, easy to use graphic tool based on which they could say where does their school building, school ground or services stand in terms of climate hazard and what do they need to improve. The request was that it should be made very graphic, easy to understand. So if you go next, we went to the school, we made students draw things and tell us this is where this change should be done or otherwise. So it was fun. We came up with this kind of, and this was much detailed manual to this, but components were listed on one side, the kind of threats they bring, what kind of simple initiatives could be done, at what stage these need to be done. At the time of construction, these changes need to be done, or they can be retrofitted or innovated later. What kind of hazards they would combat, and we were measuring how our 3 selected schools fare on this. So like this, we prepared a lot detailed manual for built environment. Next please. For again, for how to improve the ventilation at the same time, reduce the heat, incoming heat. Roofs, boundary walls, planters. So these were all very tailor-made solutions with graphic samples for the school decision makers to understand and for them to say that these are simple things we can do, we can implement, and more importantly, we can maintain. These are not very high-end things. At the end of it, I think I have one sample where we were showing that school how it could change. Maybe you can. So this was one school that we took up, and we were trying to see its main entrance was very low as compared to the main road. There was a nala on the side. The compound wall was broken so that water could flow into the nala at the time of inundation. So we were just trying to work out with them how it could be solved. Fortunately, the orientation was fine. If we go next, the ground was not very graded or level. This was the kind of situation school would face at the time of flooding every year once. And so their new building, which they got under School of Excellence, which was a new program of the state, they had a raised plinth for the building. That was one thing they had done. But the rest of the things, so if you see this, the plinth is quite raised. The school starts at this level. But the rest of the things were yet to be done. So small measures like, if you say, the lower level site, proximity to Nala, which could be used, multiple building blocks with uncovered access so that shading could be easily provided there, reduced green cover, poor land grading, and open compost pit. These were 5 to 6 low-cost initiatives which were proposed for the school to take up And this is how the transformed section would look. So there was a cut-off drain at the entry to be provided, which would cut off the school from the main drainage and take the water on the side to this nala. The openings could be of brick jali of this kind rather than an MST jali. Tree shading to be increased on raised planters with shaded areas. Roofs could be either this, which was a little second stage kind of thing, but at the first stage they could just do the coloring of the roofs. The grading and the slope had to be away from the school, which was also not done while the building was being redone. So these were small things. Solar roof could be tried under the state solar program. And yeah, that's it. So this was our visualization of the school before and after. Not too much of change, very doable things. This was then taken to the director of the education department and the manual could be used by all the schools. So the larger context was that the manual could be used by any school, but the local location-specific solutions, maybe a school needs to pick only 5 items out of 15 or 50 listed in the manual. So this was part of the larger work that we did on plant resilience in schools. Thank you.